My son said his graduation dinner would be just close friends. So I stayed home, trusting him. Then I saw the photos online. Every seat filled but mine. Even the toast was from another man. What happened next was unbelievable. I will tell you everything. I've always been a man of order. Numbers, ledgers, patterns that never lied. These were the quiet constants of my life. My name is Robert, and for over 30 years, I've built a life of quiet certainties, each some neatly balanced in a ledger that never spoke back. In the evenings, I would sit at my worn oak desk, the rhythmic click of the calculator soothing me as the world outside flickered and changed. I trusted the steadiness of numbers, their patient truths. It was people I never quite understood, least of all, my son. Tonight, the house is so still it feels almost brittle, as if even the walls are holding their breath. I had cooked myself a small dinner, a lonely steak seared in butter, a baked potato split down the middle, sour cream melting into the cracks. I had set the table for one. When Daniel told me his graduation dinner was just for close friends, I smiled and said I understood. I wanted him to have his night, to feel the bright heat of celebration with people his own age. I believed it when he said it would be small, just a few people. You know how these things go. I trusted his words, as I always had. After dinner, I sat by the window in the living room, cradling a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the street was quiet, lamplight spilling in soft pools across the pavement. I tried to read, an old habit that never quite took root in me, but tonight the words refused to settle. I thought about the times I had helped Daniel with his homework, sitting together at this very table, pencil in hand as I taught him to balance equations. I thought about the small, proud smile he used to give me when he got it right. It's been years since I saw that smile. The hours passed slowly. Around 9, I decided to indulge a small curiosity. It was harmless, I told myself, just a way to feel closer to the night I had been left out of. I opened my laptop and typed in Daniel's name, scrolling through the social media feeds that had always felt like a foreign language to me. My eyes found the photos before my mind could catch up. There he was, standing at the head of a long table, laughter caught in a moment of stillness. Friends crowded close, the golden light of the restaurant softening the lines of their faces. Wine glasses raised, hands clasped in toasts I would never hear. In the center of it all was a man I did not recognize, a stranger with a broad smile and an arm around Daniel's shoulder, his glass raised high. Every seat at the table was filled, except for mine. I clicked through the photos one by one, each image a small wound opening in my chest. There were shots of Daniel blowing out candles on a cake I'd never seen, his eyes bright with the light of 100 tiny flames. There were shots of the stranger leaning in, whispering something in Daniel's ear that made him laugh, a laugh I had not heard in years. In every photo, there was no space for me. My name was not there. My face, my place at the table gone. I closed the laptop softly, the faint click of the lid sealing the images inside. For a moment, I sat motionless in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the house settling around me. My heart beat slow and measured, each thud echoing in the hollow places I hadn't known were there. I thought about how I had spent years saving for that college fund, scrimping and counting pennies, watching every expense so that Daniel would never have to. I thought about the countless small sacrifices, vacations never taken, nights at the office long after the cleaning crew had gone home. I thought about how easily I had been erased. I stood and walked to the mantel, where a small silver frame held a photo of Daniel as a boy, no older than 6, his hair a wild halo of brown curls, his front teeth missing as he grinned up at me. I remembered that day at the park, the way he had run up to me with a stick in his hand, shouting that he'd found a magic sword. I'd played along, as fathers do, and for a while, we had both believed it was true. That memory felt so close tonight, as if I could still hear his laughter ringing in the air, bright and full of promise. I traced a finger along the edge of the frame. My chest ached with a quiet, resigned kind of hurt. This wasn't the first time I'd been left behind, I realized, but it was the first time I felt the weight of it so clearly. I had given Daniel everything I had to give, my time, my money, my faith in him. I had trusted that he would remember the shape of my love, even if he couldn't always see it. But tonight, every seat at the table had been filled but mine. And in that empty chair, I felt the truth settle in like a stone at the bottom of a river. Daniel had chosen his circle, and I was not in it. I sat back down at the table, the plate from dinner still there, a smear of cold butter on the knife. I thought about how Daniel had once asked me what I wanted for my birthday, years ago, and I had told him just to remember me, just to remember that I was here, holding him up even when he didn't see me. The clock ticked on, each second stretching out like a long breath held too long. I closed my eyes and let the darkness wash over me, the quiet betrayal of the night settling deep into my bones. And when I finally opened them again, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet resolve, as measured and precise as the numbers I had always trusted. I whispered to myself, my voice soft and sure in the empty room, I see. I see it all. The next morning, I woke with a dull ache in my chest, as if the weight of that empty seat had settled into my ribs overnight. Sunlight slanted through the curtains, dust motes turning in the pale light like slow dancing ghosts. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long while, the sheets twisted around my legs, and tried to gather the shape of the day in my hands. Outside, birds called to each other in the sycamores that lined the street, their songs bright and indifferent. It felt obscene, almost, that the world could keep moving forward when mine had stalled so completely. At the office, I tried to find solace in the steady order of numbers, the comfort of ledgers that balanced and columns that added up neatly. I had always found a quiet peace in the work, no surprises, no shifting loyalties, just the clean arithmetic of the world as it ought to be. But today, the numbers blurred on the page, my pen faltering on the neat lines of my ledger. My mind wandered, returning again and again to those images of Daniel, surrounded by laughter and light, a life that had no place for me. I thought of the years I had spent building that fund. Each dollar carefully tucked away, each sacrifice made in the name of a future I believed was shared. I thought of the nights I spent worrying over tuition fees and living expenses, the months when I skipped dinners out and small luxuries so that Daniel would never know the weight of those choices. And I wondered, for the first time, if he had ever truly understood what that meant. In the quiet of my small office, I let myself remember. Not just the laughter of his childhood, but the small, sharp moments that had always felt like nothing at the time, the phone calls that went unanswered, the holidays spent in polite, strained silence. The way he would change the subject whenever the conversation turned to me. I had wanted so badly to believe that these were the natural distances of growing up, not the careful boundaries of a son already building a world apart from his father. That evening, I drove to the restaurant. I told myself it was a small thing, just to see it for myself. To see the place where my absence had been so carefully framed. I parked across the street and watched the glow of the sign flicker in the dusk, the warm spill of light from the windows painting the pavement in amber hues. Couples laughed over wine glasses, and the low murmur of conversation drifted through the open door. I could almost see the table in my mind's eye. Each chair pulled close around Daniel, every seat filled with laughter and toasts that had no room for the father who had built the foundation of that night. I stood there a long time, my hands in my pockets, feeling the cool night air settle around me. There was no bitterness in me yet, just a slow, gathering sadness, like a tide pulling out to sea. I thought of how, in the photos, Daniel had looked so at ease, so completely at home in the company of those strangers. I wondered what stories he told them about me, if he told them anything at all. When I finally turned to leave, I felt the first quiet flicker of something else beneath the sadness. A small, steady flame of resolve. It was not rage. I have never been a man who rages. It was something colder, quieter. A decision taking shape in the darkness, one that I would carry in the same measured way I had carried everything else for Daniel. Back home, I pulled the college fund files from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I had kept them there for years, spreadsheets and statements, every transaction accounted for in neat, careful lines. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the weight of it, the shape of every sacrifice. I did not open the files yet. Not tonight. But just knowing they were there, that the balance of power lay in those pages, I felt something in me settle. Before I went to bed, I found myself at the photo albums again. Not the new photos, not the bright, smiling images that had excluded me so easily. The old ones, the ones I had taken with shaking hands, laughing breathlessly as Daniel teetered on his first two-wheeler, his small hands clutching the handlebars as if the world depended on it. I traced the edges of those photos with my thumb, the images worn soft from years of being held. In those photos, I could still see the boy who had looked up at me with trust in his eyes. The boy who had once believed I was the whole world. And I knew then, with a quiet finality, that while Daniel had chosen his circle, I would choose mine, that I would not be erased from the ledger of my own life. I closed the album and set it aside. In the darkness of my room, I let the quiet fill the spaces where anger might have lived. There was no place for rage here. Only the slow, deliberate breath of a man who sees clearly at last. I lay back on my pillow and let the night close over me like a balm, the first threads of a plan knitting together in the silence. I would not be forgotten. I would not be erased. And when the time came, I would take back what was mine, quietly, carefully, the way I have always done everything. For days, I moved through the world as if nothing had changed. At work, I balanced the books with the same quiet precision, each column adding up to neat totals that never betrayed the quiet storm brewing beneath my calm surface. My colleagues noticed nothing, no hesitation in my voice, no falter in the careful cadence of my movements. After all, I had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of silence, of hiding the tremors of my heart behind a patient smile. I spoke with Daniel on the phone once that week. Just a quick check-in, his voice bright and distracted on the other end of the line. He told me about plans for the summer, the job offers he was weighing, and the friends who had offered him places to stay while he found his footing. He never mentioned the dinner, and I never asked. We spoke like polite strangers, each word carefully measured. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my small kitchen, the weight of that conversation pressing into the tender spaces of my chest. At night, I lay in bed with the documents spread out across the covers, the glow of the desk lamp turning the pages into islands of yellow light. I studied each statement, each careful deposit and interest payment. I had built this fund for him piece by piece, a promise I had never questioned until the night I saw my place taken by another man. Now, I read each line with a different kind of reverence. A quiet determination that this was mine, that I had the right to decide how the sum of my life's work would be spent. I researched the laws, the fine print of the account I had once set up with so much hope. I learned how to redirect the funds, how to move them without so much as a ripple on the surface. There would be no need for drama, no angry confrontation. I would simply shift the course of the river back to its true source, quietly and without fanfare. During the day, I began to gather what small pieces of information I could about the man who had toasted Daniel in my place. His name was Thomas, an older man, broad-shouldered and well-groomed, the kind of man whose presence filled a room without effort. A mentor, Daniel had called him once in passing, though I had never heard the name until that night. I found him online, polished photos on professional sites, profiles that spoke of success and influence. I read the carefully curated narratives of his life, each one another small piece of the puzzle Daniel had built without me. In the evenings, I would stand at the window, the city's lights flickering like distant stars. I rehearsed conversations in the quiet of my mind, conversations I might never have, but which gave shape to the resolve that had taken root in my chest. I imagined telling Daniel the truth of what I had seen, of the ways his absence had settled like a stone in the hollow of my heart. I imagined his face, the careful blankness I had seen so many times, and I told myself that it no longer mattered. His understanding was no longer the measure of my own worth. I remembered the nights when he was a boy, how he would curl up beside me on the couch with his head on my shoulder. I would read to him from books he chose, my voice low and steady in the darkness. He had always loved stories of knights and dragons, of quests that tested the mettle of the heart. I wonder now if he ever understood that I saw myself in those stories too, the quiet knight who held the line, who protected what was his without fanfare or applause. Now, I realized the dragon was never an outside force. It was the quiet erasure of a father's place in his son's life, the empty seat at a table that was meant to be mine. And I would not let that stand. By the end of the week, I had transferred the college fund into a new account, still under my name, still legal, but beyond Daniel's reach. It was a simple thing, just a series of numbers on a screen, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost in the quiet spaces of our lives. I did not tell Daniel. I did not feel the need. This was mine to decide, just as he had decided who would stand at his table in my place. I did not feel triumphant, only a calm, quiet certainty that this was right, that I was not simply the sum of what I had given, but also the keeper of my own legacy. One night, I found myself holding an old photograph of Daniel as a boy, taken on a summer afternoon when the world still felt soft and bright. He was wearing a paper crown we had made together, the sun turning his hair to gold. In the photo, he was looking up at me with a grin so pure it made my chest ache. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb, a small smile on my lips. The boy in that photo would have saved me a seat. The man he had become did not. I placed the photo back in the drawer and turned off the light. In the darkness, I felt the shape of my decision settle around me like a cloak. I would move forward quietly, without the need for apology or explanation. And when the time came, I would stand at the center of my own life once more. Because the quietest revenge is not in words or anger, it is in the quiet reclaiming of what was always mine. I moved with deliberate caution, each decision a carefully placed stone on the path I had chosen. The college fund was no longer an uncertain promise. It was a certainty now, secured in an account that bore only my name. It was a small act of reclamation, but it felt as if I had reached into the hollow places of my heart and drawn back something that had always been mine. In the days that followed, I found myself watching Daniel's life unfold from a distance. His online post showed a man who had outgrown the shape of his father's world, a man who laughed easily with friends, who stood tall in rooms I would never enter. I did not begrudge him that life, not anymore. I had come to understand that love is not a ledger to be balanced or a debt to be repaid. It is a choice, made moment by moment. And in the quiet of my own home, I made the choice to stop waiting for his invitation. But I was not finished. The man who had raised the glass in my place, Thomas, had become a specter in my mind, a puzzle piece that refused to sit quietly in the corner of my thoughts. I needed to see him, to understand the shape of the void he had filled in Daniel's life. It was not jealousy that drove me, just a quiet, insistent need to know. I found Thomas's office easily enough, a polished space in a sleek building downtown, all glass and chrome, and the soft hush of carpeted floors. I told the receptionist I was an old friend of his, that I had some questions about his mentorship work. It was not a lie, not entirely. She smiled politely and ushered me in. Thomas was older than I expected, his hair shot through with silver at the temples, his smile practiced and warm. He rose to shake my hand, and I noticed the firmness of his grip, the way his eyes flicked over me with quick, assessing precision. I introduced myself simply, Robert, Daniel's father. For a moment, I saw the faintest flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite, professional interest of a man who had learned to shape every word to the needs of the moment. We spoke for a while, our conversation smooth and easy, the small talk of strangers who know how to keep the edges soft. I asked about his work, about the ways he guided young men like Daniel into the world. He spoke with practiced fluency, each sentence polished and sure. I listened, my face a careful mask of polite interest, my heart measuring every word. At some point, I asked how he had met Daniel, what had drawn him to the boy I once held in my arms. He spoke of potential and promise, of ambition that needed only a guiding hand. He never mentioned me, never once acknowledged the man who had built the foundation of that promise in late nights and small sacrifices. And in that omission, I saw the truth of what had been taken. I nodded along, offering small smiles and murmurs of agreement. But inside, I felt the quiet ache of finality settle into my bones. Thomas was not the villain of this story. He was simply a man who had seen a space to fill and stepped into it. The real betrayal had come from Daniel, from the ease with which he had allowed that space to become permanent. When I left Thomas's office, I walked slowly through the city, the late afternoon sun slanting long shadows across the pavement. I felt no anger, just a kind of resigned clarity. The world was full of men like Thomas, men who would always find a seat at the table if they wanted it badly enough. It was not his fault that I had been left outside. It was mine for believing that love alone could hold a place in someone else's life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter to Daniel. I did not plan to send it, at least not yet. It was more an act of exorcism, a way to lay down the weight of what I had carried for so long. In the letter, I spoke of the small memories that still clung to the edges of my heart, The time I taught him to ride a bike on the cracked pavement of our driveway, the nights I spent reading to him by the glow of a single lamp, his small hand resting on my knee as he drifted to sleep. I told him that I had seen the photos, that I understood now, that there was no blame in my heart, only the quiet decision to stop waiting for an invitation that would never come. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the back of my ledger, where the balances still added up neatly, even if the shape of our lives did not. I ran my fingers over the worn leather of the cover, feeling the small comfort of numbers that never lied to me. I did not need Daniel's understanding to find my own peace. I did not need his permission to reclaim what was mine. And in that quiet, deliberate silence, I found a small, unexpected grace. The knowledge that I was not defined by the place he had left empty at his table, but by the quiet dignity with which I would fill the empty spaces of my own life. I closed the ledger and turned off the light, the night settling softly around me. The echo of that empty seat no longer felt like a wound. It felt like an open door, waiting to be closed on my own terms. Daniel agreed to meet me at a small cafe on the edge of town, one of those quiet places where the air smells of roasted beans and the windows are always fogged with warmth. I arrived early, as I always did, taking a table by the window where I could watch the slow drift of pedestrians outside. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee, letting the warmth sink into my bones. The quiet murmur of conversations around me was a kind of balm, a gentle hum that asked nothing of me. When Daniel arrived, he looked every inch the man he had become, polished and sure of himself, his hair neatly combed, his smile quick and easy. He slid into the seat across from me, his eyes bright with a kind of restless energy I had come to recognize as ambition. He spoke first, telling me about the new job offer he had accepted, something in finance, a world I knew too well, but one he had never asked me about. I listened as he spoke of new cities and new friends, of plans that reached farther than the small world we had once shared. His words were filled with the easy certainty of someone who had never known the weight of quiet sacrifice. I nodded along, offering small murmurs of approval, though inside I felt each word like a small, deliberate cut. This was his world now, and I was a visitor, an observer at the edges of a life that no longer had room for me. When he finally paused, I took a slow breath and met his eyes. "There's something I wanted to tell you," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I've made some adjustments to the college fund. Nothing to worry about, just a bit of housekeeping, making sure everything's in order for the future." Daniel's brow furrowed, but only for a moment. He nodded, already moving on to the next thought in his mind. "Sure, Dad. Whatever you think is best," he said, his tone easy, dismissive. He didn't ask for details, didn't wonder why the fund he had once trusted in my hands might need tending. I realized then that he trusted me still, trusted me to handle the practical details of his life, even if he no longer trusted me with a seat at his table. There was a kind of irony in that, I suppose, that in the end, I was still the one who kept the books balanced, even as the bonds between us had come undone. We spoke a little longer, though it was clear that Daniel's mind was already elsewhere, on the next meeting, the next promise of a future that had no place for a father's quiet care. I let him talk, let him fill the space between us with bright, eager words that had nothing to do with me. And when it was time to leave, I stood and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gentle weight that reminded me of the boy he once was. "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it out. Though not in the way he might have wanted. I was proud of the man he had become, even if that man no longer needed me. Proud of the fact that I had given him the tools to build his own life, even if it meant building it far from mine. He smiled then, a quick flash of teeth, and I saw in that smile the ghost of the boy I had raised. For a moment, the years fell away, and I saw him as he once was, small and bright and full of trust. But the moment passed quickly, and he was gone, stepping out into the cool air with a wave over his shoulder. I watched him go, the door swinging shut behind him with a quiet finality. I finished my coffee slowly, the warmth of the cup a small comfort in the sudden hush. Outside, the sky had turned to soft twilight, the last light of the day painting the world in muted golds and blues. As I walked back to my car, I felt the weight of that empty seat begin to lift from my shoulders. Not because Daniel had offered me a place again, but because I had finally stopped waiting for him to. I understood now that my love for him was not measured by the chair he offered me at his table, but by the quiet strength I carried in my own heart. I had reclaimed what was mine, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a piece of myself. There was no bitterness in that, only a quiet sense of finality, a gentle closing of a chapter one had never wanted to end. I drove home through the gathering dark, the city lights flickering like distant stars, and felt the first small taste of freedom on my tongue. Because sometimes, the truest revenge is not in what you take back, but in the simple, steady act of letting go. The weeks that followed felt like a slow exhale after years of holding my breath. Each morning, I woke before the sun, the air cool and clean in the quiet spaces of my small home. I brewed coffee in the dark kitchen, the rich scent filling the air as the first light crept over the horizon. There was something sacred in those early hours, a sense of calm that had once felt so distant to me. With the college fund now secure in my own name, I began to think of how to use it, not for Daniel, but for myself. For years, that money had been a promise I held out like an offering, a testament to the future I had built for him. But now, I saw it for what it truly was. The quiet sum of my own sacrifices, the careful arithmetic of my love. And I knew at last that it was mine to keep. I used a portion of it to pay off the last of my mortgage, the small weight of that debt lifting from my shoulders with a final, satisfying click. I put aside enough to ensure I would never again have to count pennies at the grocery store or weigh each small indulgence like a sin. And with what remained, I gave myself the gift of a life I had never dared to imagine. I booked a trip, a quiet journey to the coast, a place I had always dreamed of but never allowed myself to visit. I spent my days walking along the shore, the salt air clean and bright on my skin. At night, I watched the stars spill across the sky, unbroken by the city's glow, and felt something inside me settle into a gentle rhythm. I stopped looking at the photos online. I stopped checking for updates on Daniel's life. I realized that those images were no longer mine to haunt. He had built his world without me, and in doing so, he had given me the freedom to build my own. In the quiet of those days, I found a kind of forgiveness, not for Daniel, but for myself. For all the years I had spent waiting for a seat that was never mine, for the small betrayals I had swallowed without protest. I saw at last that I had been the author of my own erasure, that my silence had allowed him to forget me so easily. And in that simple truth, I found the first taste of peace. I filled my time with small joys I had once set aside. I began to cook again, not for anyone else, but for the simple pleasure of feeding my own body. I read the books that had gathered dust on my shelves, my evenings spent in the quiet company of words that asked nothing of me. I took long walks through the neighborhood, the weight of the past falling away with each step. Sometimes, I would pass the restaurant where Daniel's dinner had been held. I no longer lingered at the windows, no longer imagined the laughter that had filled the chair meant for me. I walked past without pause, the echoes of that night nothing more than shadows fading in the light of my new days. One evening, I stood at the window of my own home, watching the sun sink low behind the trees. The air smelled of rain, and the soft hush of it against the roof was a comfort I had never noticed before. I thought of the man I had been, the father who had measured his worth by the place he held in his son's life, and I let him go. I let the grief of that empty seat dissolve into the gentle darkness. When I closed the door behind me that night, I did it softly, with a kind of quiet finality. I no longer carried the ache of what I had lost. I carried only the calm certainty of what I had reclaimed, my own quiet dignity, the shape of a life that belonged to me alone. Because in the end, revenge is not a scream in the dark or a righteous fury that burns all it touches. Sometimes it is the slow, patient work of building something new from the ruins. It is the quiet triumph of a man who learns, at last, to love himself enough to let go. And in that silence, I found my peace. If you felt the quiet ache and slow triumph of Robert's journey, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to explore another quiet revenge, a story of quiet heartbreak turned into quiet power, or anything else that stirs your heart, just ask me. See you soon in the next story.